Well, I think something like that kind of music is called for, given the current situation. This is Journey of an Aesthete podcast. This is a rescheduling of a show. I hope the audio is okay. I've been working on some things, some tech things. This, as you know, may or may not know, this show was scheduled for September 27th, the very hour that the hurricane hit. So, you know, a lot happened the night before about which I knew next to nothing because there was no communication and we still had power. But that day I didn't know enough to know, that there was power for the first part of the day or something. But I have some pictures to show you some context here. So this is what I saw. Let me scoot my chair around here. Here we go. Moving things around. It's good to be back. It's good to have a roof over the head and running water and all the rest of it. But this is what if you can see there, I don't know if you can see that. That is the view outside my house. And that is basically, that brown you see is basically a brown ocean. I have no other way to describe it. It's just, and so, let's see here. Just trying to give you some visual. And this is what it looked like up close. So that's right outside my house. Now you can see that's all ocean water, brown water. And I was so lucky that didn't come into our houses, but it was as you can see, it was very close. And that's the hour I was supposed to be doing this stream. And so I was just sitting in my house wondering what's going on and just, trying to contact my mom and everything. So that was the situation. Let me see here. You can see another closer shot of it there. I'm trying to find what it looks like right now. So hold on a second. Where are we here? Shoot. Just bear with me. We'll get to Annie Dillard. Annie Dillard, I'll be quite honest with you. If I had my druthers, we would spend 3 hours on just Annie Dillard. I'm not going to, don't worry, I'm not going to inflict 3 hours on you. But what I'm trying to say is that our podcast is about things like Annie Dillard and the blues and piano primarily. And those things are, I think, worthy of our attention. And they're certainly worthy of many hours, particularly this, what we'll get to in a minute, this Annie Dillard. I just would want to make clear that, a lot of things in life matter, and it's certainly, well, hold that thought. I'm gonna just find, bear with me here. What do we got? This is more or less what it looks like now. So you can see that's a cleanup, but that's what the water was on. That's the paved street. So imagine every day seeing that and then seeing that brown water coming from. So there you go. That's about the hurricane. I want to say a couple of things up front related to the hurricane, if I may. We're going to get to the Dillard. This is a book lunch after all. And this is an aesthetic series. It's not a geological series or, heaven help us, a politics series, a Politico series. But there's a dude named Thomas Flight, and he's a fellow cinephile. There are some of us still left, real cinephiles, and he's one of them. He has a wonderful channel. So Thomas Flight is part of a movement called Beloved Asheville, or Beloved Asheville. Beloved, like dearly beloved, or like Asheville will be loved. Beloved Asheville, I think, is the name. And evidently, he not only does he have a great channel where he talks about cinema and he does deep analyses of the show Succession and etc. And he had a really nice close reading of Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, the Spike Jonze picture that was good. He's a good guy, but he lives in Asheville, and that's why he has this group. And evidently, from what I can tell, he's making a documentary about Hurricane Helene, if that's what it is. It's hard for me to, I glean all the things that I can. So help him out, Thomas Flight, Beloved Asheville, and then Equipment for Asheville. What else? I know there's a million things that are important that I'll forget, but that's okay. working under unusual circumstances here, of course, and so many good people. I know it sounds perhaps overused a little bit, but so many good people have helped me and helped us out here in the past month. And of course, as you know, my last stream was I was aboard a train. Yeah, well, thank you, Peter. But anyhow, as you know, my very last stream was on an Amtrak, and now this stream is back in my living room, and then we had another hurricane. So in a way, I see that there were two hurricanes, one of which was primarily natural, or maybe not. I don't know. We can discuss that. Yes, and one of which was man-made, human-made, which happened a week ago. So it's been, disaster on top of disaster. I should say Thomas Flight talks about Susan Sontag in his video essay. So he's into Sontag, as I am, and talks about, he talks about Sontag's theories about media literacy and her idea that, too many images. So again, Susan Sontag was writing before the internet and before social media, and she was talking about an excess of images that lose their meaning over time or numbing of disaster. The essay is called Regarding the Pain of Others. Regarding the Pain of Others, and it's a classic and nonfiction essay. I'm not going to talk about that, but we are doing this aesthetics series, and in the aesthetics series I mentioned Sontag a lot, and talking about, I guess, interpretation as part of that, so it's great to see him mention that essay, and he has a very high-tech, well-appointed, very informative channel. So I try. See, it's the thing. There aren't many of us cinephiles anymore. I mean, I'm not saying that we're totally dying out, but we're a minority. I mean, real cinephiles, and so it's always great to meet one. And this person lives in Asheville, so we talk about the Grail movie theater and other issues. But anyhow, I want to move on from weather and voting and all that, and get into this book. So I have all these notes on an American childhood, and I didn't quite, I always had this dilemma, like, how do I proceed? Have a book this rich, a text this rich, an author this, well, I could say, spiritually, aesthetically rich, is always a challenge of how do I proceed. So one thing I'm definitely going to do is going to do my close reading system. So this is going to be a longest stream because we're going to do a lot of excerpts and talk deeply about what she's doing in this book, with lots of excerpts. So I'm going to start off with overview. So Annie Dillard is from Pennsylvania. My mom is from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My mom was originally from the Squirrel Hill region, where the Tree of Life Synagogue was and all that. That area. And I have not been to Pennsylvania that often in my life since then. So I have connections to that state, as does Annie Dillard. And as does John Updike, which we'll get to too in the following months. So I thought it'd be interesting to say that this book was written in the 80s. So I think she probably wrote it in 86 or 85. This is a first edition. Get out my glasses, 87. And I'm going to say some very abstract, I'm going to use her language, I'm going to make some noun sentences. Although I just said make, which is a verb. But what I mean is it's going to be a little noun heavy. So my apologies to Annie Dillard, who loves verbal verb sentences. Oh, yeah, absolutely. So here's the thing. Noun. So conceptual categories. And these are, again, don't like using these words because they're very insufficient often, but sometimes they're insufficient but necessary. She's I would call a literary author, coming from a very deeply high art tradition of trying to write the best prose you can and taking prose seriously. So Thoreau, Wendell Berry, Ralph Waldo Emerson. It's a tradition of, that sees prose and writing as its own reward, and sees written prose of the type she does as autonomous and special and unlike other forms of communication like speech that I'm doing now, or talking, or just blips on a screen, or just scraps of phrases people type now on the internet. It's trying to elevate prose into the highest art form. And we're going to see some of that artistry at work in this book. And I use the word spiritual. She's a very interesting author, spiritual. She's moved in and out of spiritual tradition. She grew up Christian, but she's had her quarrels with the Christian church, as a lot of us have. And I think one of the, I don't want to say denouement, the climax of this book is her leaving her own church as a girl, young girl, as a child actually, and writing a letter to the pastor and saying, I'm done with your church. And the book closes with that. In any event, so this was written in the 80s, but it's about the 50s. So we're going to get a double. Normally I wouldn't say this. Normally if we're doing a memoir that was written in the 80s, I wouldn't discuss 87 or 86. I'd just say, well, let's dive into the 50s, the world of Playhouse 90 and Your Show of Shows and Jack Benny and Ed Sullivan on television, for example, or John Updike's stories in The New Yorker, which is also, in John Cheever, which is also very 50s, and Eisenhower and all that, and McCarthyism and the Red Scare, things from the 50s. Adlai Stevenson. And I would just focus on that. But it occurs to me, because the 80s was so long ago, the 80s in a way is like the 50s. In other words, it's just this ancient world. So we almost have to foreground, in a way, the fact this was written in a different era of publishing. So it's interesting to think about time travel. We're traveling both to the 80s and the 50s and 40s and 30s, because she has roots in Pennsylvania. So where do we start? So syntax is everything. Syntax is the soul of prose. That's where you find the soul. And sentences. So we'll just gonna read the very first paragraph, because I want to get into some of these syntax matters. All right, we ready? When everything else has gone from my brain, the president's name, the state capitals, the neighborhoods where I lived, and then my own name and what it was on earth I sought. And then at length the faces of my friends, and finally the faces of my family. When all this has dissolved, what will be left, I believe, is topology, the dreaming memory of land as it lay this way and that. I will see the city poured rolling down the mountain valleys like slag, and see the city lights sprinkled and curved around the hills' curves, rows of bonfires winding. At sunset, a red light like house fire shines from the narrow hillside windows. The house's bricks burn like glowing coals. So that's how she opens her book. She'll forget all these earthly things, her name, family, all these things, and then but the topology. So she's stating outright that there's a bucolic nature rootedness of her sensibility and aesthetic, geography. And of course, what were we just talking about? Hurricanes, climate change, warm. When you have 75-degree weather every day in November, bad enough actually in September, but October and November when it's 75 all the time and dry, things happen, under those kinds of under those kinds of conditions. But those are all issues of land and human interaction with land. But I just wanted to give you a sense of that what I just read is her kind of lyrical. She's just introducing her book. So we go here. She brings in her family. In 1955, when I was 10, my father's reading went to his head. My father's reading during that time, and for many years before and after, consisted for the most part of life on the Mississippi. He was a young executive in the old family firm, American Standard. Sometimes he traveled alone on business. Traveling, he checked into a hotel, found a bookstore, and chose for the night's reading, after what I fancied had been long deliberation, yet another copy of Life on the Mississippi. He brought all these books home. There were dozens of copies of Life on the Mississippi on the living room shelves. From time to time, I read one. So, and then she says, what's another influence on her? Jazz music. In particular, Dixieland jazz. So she says New Orleans was the music we loved in her house. She says New Orleans was the source of the music he loved. Dixieland jazz. In New Orleans, men would blow it in the air and beat it underfoot. The music that hustled and snapped. The music whose zip matched his when he was a man about town at home in Pittsburgh, working for the family firm. The music he tapped his foot to when he was a man about town in New York for a few years after college, working for the family firm by day, and by night hanging out at Jimmy Ryan's on 52nd Street with Zooty Singleton, the drummer who befriended him, and the rest of the house band. A certain kind of Dixieland suited him best. They played it at Jimmy Ryan's, and Pee Wee Russell and Eddie Condon played it too. New Orleans Dixieland chilled a bit by its journey up the river, and smoothed by its sojourns in Chicago and New York. So see this spitting quality to her prose and syntax? Up the river, stretching out, on foot, tap the foot, man about town. There's this kind of traveling, that's the topology. She's weaving imagistically, she's weaving a portrait of Pennsylvania in those years. Admittedly, her version of Pennsylvania, which would not be everyone's, of course. There's stuff about her mom here. She says her mom, she said when our mother met Frank Doak, he was 27, witty, bookish, unsnobbish, a good dancer. He was a lapsed Presbyterian and a believing Republican. Books make the man, read the blue bookplate in all his books. Father had hung around jazz in New York, had half-heartedly played the drums. He had smoked marijuana, written poems, begun a novel, painted in oils, imagined a career as a riverboat pilot, and acted for more than 10 seasons in amateur and small-town professional theater. At American Standard, the company, he was the personnel manager. So I'm moving ahead. The second book she mentions is Kidnapped by Robert Louis Stevenson. She said, one Saturday morning I was reading Kidnapped. So throughout this book, it's like a memoir about books, It's about many things, of course, but now that's all before we get to part one. So we got part one here, and then what she does is interesting. The story starts back in 1950, when I was 5. Oh, the great humming silence of the empty neighborhoods in those days, the neighborhoods abandoned everywhere across continental America, the city residential areas, the new suburbs, that's in quotes, the towns and villages on the peopled highways, the cities, towns, and villages on the rivers, the shores, in the Rocky and Appalachian Mountains, the Piedmont, the dells, the bayous, the hills, the Great Basin, the Great Valley, the Great Plains. Oh, the silence. For every morning the neighborhoods emptied, and all vital activity, it seemed, set forth for parts unknown. The men left in a rush. They flung on coats. They slid kisses at everybody's cheeks. They slammed doors shut. They slammed car doors. They ground their car starters till the motors caught with a jump. And the Catholic school children left in a rush. I saw them from our dining room windows. They burst into the street buttoning their jackets. They threw dry catapult pods at the stop sign and each other. They hugged their brown and tan workbooks, right? Clutching their workbooks to their workbooks to them, clamped and parted, and proceeded towards St. Bede's Church School almost by accident. So she's, again, painting the picture of a world. It's a world, I should say, is mostly unlike our current world. And I'd say practically in every conceivable way. Note I say mostly. I mean, there are, we breathe oxygen and we have schools, and there are some similarities, but in the main, the way everything done is fundamentally different than how we do things now. Let's see here. There's another side to Annie Dillard, which is intimately connected to the stuff I just read, material I just read, which is Annie Dillard, the polemicist, the mystic, the radical, if I can call her that, the ethicist, the moralist. I'd say more ethicist than moralist. Another stream I'll talk about some of these differences, but still, almost like a Jeremiah, almost. She always pulls back from outright preachiness, but I'll give you a taste of that, Annie Dillard, because some of it might very much relate to what we're all going through now. I mentioned the second hurricane, which is not only a national one, it has global implications, but she doesn't pull punches here. This starts this chapter. The interior life is often stupid. Its egoism blinds it and deafens it. Its imagination spins out ignorant tales. Fascinated. It fancies that the western wind blows on the self. Self is capitalized. And leaves fall at the feet of the self for a reason. And people are watching. A mind risks real ignorance for the sometimes paltry prize of an imagination enriched. The trick of reason is to get the imagination to seize the actual world, if only from time to time. There's a lot to unpack there. Blowing on the self, capitalized, and idea of a reason. She's the excitement of being entertained, the imagination enriched, but as she says, the things that are being entertained are, in her words, stupid and not unreal, that they're not, she says, the trick of reason. So she again, it's a classic thing, reason versus emotion or fantasy. She's playing around with that. She's not selling on one or the other, but the trick of reason is to get the imagination to seize the actual world. So it's like, we got imaginations. The imagination should have some. So this is the polemical Annie Dillard. There's a lot of it in this book. But I feel that kind of passage that she just wrote is really like talking about the valleys and the vales. It's all of it. I think it's all for her, all connected. Our parents and grandparents and all their friends seemed insensible to their own prominent defect, their limp, coarse skin. We children had, for instance, proper hands. Our fluid, pliant fingers joined their skin. Adults had misshapen, knuckly hands, loose in their skin like bones in bags. It was a wonder they could open jars. They were loose in their skins all over, except at the wrists and ankles like rabbits. We were whole. We were pleasing to ourselves. Our crystalline eyes shone from firm, smooth sockets. We spoke in pure, piping voices through dark, tidy lips. Adults were coming apart, but they neither noticed nor minded. So she's saying, she's giving the child's eye view that we children are all that. We're great, and these adults are imperfect and fallen and all that. Of course, that's certainly not Annie Dillard's view now. That's the view of this 5-year-old who's gone, by the way, because just there's a reason that 10-year-olds don't vote, even though that, by the way, that wouldn't improve anything. So don't go there. But what I'm saying is, there's adult world and children's world, but she's using language to enter into that kind of consciousness and saying, well, it's about skin and about do you have wrinkles or not and all this. She goes on, skin was earth. It was soil. I could see even on my own skin the joined trapezoids of dust specks God had wetted and stuck with his spit the morning he made Adam from dirt. Now, all these generations later, we people could still see on our skin the inherited prints of the dust specks of Eden. I love this thought and repeat it too for myself often. I don't know where I got it. My parents cited Adam and Eve only in jokes. So this is an important thing, not the Adam and Eve part, the comedy part. So another, I guess you could call it, theme in this book is comedy, believe it or not. So she as she said, she grew up in a house full of comedians, and her parents basically taught how to tell jokes and basically held seminars. Can you imagine growing up in a household like the 50 of the things that your mom and dad studied Jack Benny and Ed Sullivan, and this is what the straight guy does. There's all these passages where they're basically having to tell the joke, and I'll try to find that here. But anyhow, Adam and Eve were just useful as lines in a joke, or about people making comedy out of these stories, right? Trying to find something. There's two things: the books, there's the comedy. She comes back again. Joanne Sheedy and the Catholic school children carried brown and tan workbooks, which they filled, I believe, with gibberish. They not only had to memorize, but had to believe. So she's saying it's those strange people over there that have these strange beliefs and they're learning gibberish. It's fun. It's she's having fun. She's having fun with differences of perspective. Children, adult, Protestants, Catholic, that side of the street, this side of the street. Let's see. I'm trying to find the thing about comedy. Let's see here. Books. Here we go. Here's the introduction to books. Now she's gonna do a very Annie Dillard thing, which is to withhold. So she'll criticize on the one hand, but pull back from the criticism, or she'll state something that's very cliched and sentimental, and lest you, the reader, like what she says, will remind you that what she just said was this cliche thing that you ought not to put much store by. I mean, this is all part of her tone, her sensibility. I'll get into this. It's got examples. It's hard to. It's what makes her a great writer, by the way. All this stuff. She said, I had been driven into nonfiction against my wishes. I wanted to read fiction, but I had learned to be cautious about it. Isn't that interesting? When you open a book, the sentimental library poster said, anything can happen. This was so. A book of fiction was a bomb. It was a landmine you wanted to go off. You wanted to blow your whole day. Unfortunately, hundreds of thousands of books were duds. They had been rusting out of everyone's way for so long that they no longer worked. There was no way to distinguish the duds from the live mines, except to throw yourself at them headlong, one by one. So she's saying there were a lot of bad books, a lot of good books, no way to know the difference. The only way to know is just to indiscriminately, randomly throw yourself at the books, which she does. She goes on to criticize even more. She said the library was sentimental. The suggestions of adults were uncertain and incoherent. Uncertain and incoherent. That's actually a lot of what people say these days. I find both those things, uncertain and incoherent. They gave you Nancy Drew with one hand and Little Women with the other. So here's some Nancy Drew. Here's Louisa May Alcott. This kind of it's all the same. It's all books. Here you go. We'll just throw stuff at you. Throw books at you. It's all books. I mean, she's coming down hard on that kind of egalitarianism, and I have some sympathy for that because if you put a gun to my head and said you must do one of the following books, a Nancy Drew book or Little Women, I think I would pick the latter, although perversely I might be tempted to read a Nancy Drew book on book lunch. I don't know, just for fun. I'm just having fun here. Anyhow, they mix bad and good books together. Any book which contained children or short adults or animals was felt to be a children's book. So also was any book about the sea, as though danger or even fresh air were a child's prerogative, or any book by Charles Dickens and Mark Twain. Okay, here we go. Virtually all British books actually were children's books. No one understood children like the British. Interesting. Suited to female children were love stories, set in any century but this one. So you can give a kid a love story, but it had to have been written in 1850, never 1950 or 1940, right? Consequently, one had to read Exasperated Often to Fury. So she doesn't like all Exasperated Often to Fury. That's her commentary. Dillard, Exasperated Often to Fury, Pickwick Papers, Desiree, Wuthering Heights, Lad, A Dog, Gulliver's Travels, Gone with the Wind, Robinson Crusoe, Nordhoff and Hall's Bounty Trilogy, Moby Dick, The Five Little Peppers, Innocents Abroad, Lord Jim, Old Yeller. The fiction stacks at the Homewood Library, their volumes alphabetized by author, baffled me. How can I learn to choose a novel? That I could not easily reach the top two shelves helped limit choices a little. She read Samuel Johnson, James Jones, big difference, From Here to Eternity. I had heard of Mill on the Floss, George Eliot. I read it and it was good. On its binding was printed a figure, a man dancing or running. I had noticed this figure before. That's the Modern Library logo. And like books of the 50s, it was the Modern Library. They had the dude. I'm sure I might have a book back there with that icon. Some more Dillard critique coming. The going was often rocky. I couldn't count on Modern Library the way I could count on, say, Mad Magazine, which never failed to slay me. So Mad Magazine was always good, right? It was not iffy or spotty. It was like always delivered, right? Native Son was good. Robert Reich novel, Native Son. Walden was pretty good, Thoreau's Walden. The interpretation of dreams was okay. Okay, I like that. She doesn't say good. She says that's okay. Freud's interpretation of dreams. So this is all art, including this book, is from a point of view. It's more important that it be from a point of view than if the point of view is correct. So I'm not, but let's say I was a doctrinaire Freudian who still exists. They're still in our midst. And I thought Freud was the end-all and be-all. I'm going to come across this passage. Interpretation of dreams was okay, you know. And the education of Henry Adams was awful. She goes on. I mean, I'm just not going to... She says, it was a plain fact, plain truth, that most books fell apart halfway through. They fell apart as their protagonists quit, without any apparent reluctance, like idiots diving voluntarily into buckets, the most interesting part of their lives, and entered upon decades of unrelieved tedium. Interesting. I no more expected anyone else on earth to have read a book I had read than I expected someone else to have twirled the same blade of grass. Books swept me away, one after the other, this way and that. I made endless vows according to their lights, for I believed them. She believed these books, right? Back to the interior life again. She said it was stupid. She's going to say some more about the interior life. The interior life expands and fills. It approaches the edge of skin. It thickens with its own vivid story. It even begins to hear rumors from beyond the horizon skin's rim of nations and wars. You wake one day and discover your grandmother. You wake another day and notice, like any curious naturalist, the boys. So she opens up her paragraph. She's noticing this species called boys. She's checking them out. And she labels her checking them out as her being a naturalist. Isn't that great? She's a naturalist. There were already boys then, okay, not tough boys, much as I miss their inventiveness and easy democracy. Interesting. The other little boys have easy democracy and inventiveness. Is that their privilege? Is it kind of privilege for democracy to be easy for them? Is that what she's saying? Complex. This book has complex ideas in it about growing up, about coming of age, about nature, and about, land and skin and nations. And this is all her mysticism. It takes a very, very idiosyncratic, it's just amazing. It's an idiosyncratic view of the universe, There were the polite boys of Richland Lane who aspired to the Presbyterian ministry. Those boys that are Presbyterians, they're going to all trying to become, ministers or something, pastors, Their fathers were surgeons, lawyers, architects, and businessmen who sat on the boards of churches and hospitals. Early on warm weekday evenings, we children played rough in the calm yards and cultivated woods, grabbing and bruising each other, often enough in the course of our magnificently organized games. This is a long passage. She talks about playing with the boys. She's a tomboy would be one anachronistic word to describe it, But there was another kind of boy, and she calls them the dancing school boys. It turned out were our boys. The boys who ascended through the boys' private school as we ascended through the girls. I was surprised to see them their first Friday afternoon in dancing school. I was surprised, that is, to see that I already knew them, that I already knew almost everyone in the room. I was surprised that dancing school, as an institution, was eerily more significant than all my other lessons and classes, and that it was not peripheral at all, but central. For here we all were. I'd see the boys in, of all places, church. I'd see them at the country club, too. I knew the girls from church, the country club, and school. Here we all were at dancing school. Here we all were, dressed to the teeth and sitting on rows of peculiarly painted and gilded chairs. Here we all were, boys and girls, plunged by our conspiring elders into the bewildering social truth that we were meant to make each other's acquaintance. Dancing school. She's painting a world. This is a world with institutions like dancing school and churches. You can tell from this prose, too, that a part of her loves all of this. Part of her, not all of her. So this is the kind of, I guess the word would be elegiac or lyrical. Interesting. Interesting. I think. There's a passage here that's very conventional. I mean, she's right. You know, all writers. Some of my music is conventional. I mean in terms of a description, not evaluation. It's the kind of scene a lot of people, especially female authors, would write. I'm going to read it because I want to look at her twist on the. So you'll see. She does her own thing with it. Isn't he cute? Bibi would whisper to me as we sat in the girls' row on the edge of the ballroom floor. I had never before seen a painted chair. My mother favored wood for its own sake. The lugubrious instructors were demonstrating one of several foxtrots. It's a kind of dance, the foxtrot. So already, you've seen many passages like this, as you know, girls checking out boys, isn't he cute? But already the Dillardisms. She's talking about the wood and the fact her mother only liked natural wood, and that they had this gaudy painted. This is like her talking about the earth and the leaves and all. She's making an aesthetic. It's not just a girl talking to another girl about the cute boy. It's this other thing going on here. And then she says the instructors are lugubrious, you know. Which boy? Ronnie, she whispered one week, and Danny, the next. I would find that one in the boys' row. He'd fastened his fist to his seat and was rocking back and forth from his hips, all unconsciously open-mouthed. Sure. Isn't he cute? Minnie would ask at school. And I would think of this Ricky or Dick, recall some stray bit of bubbling laughter in which he had been caught helpless, pawing at his bangs with his bent wrist. His saliva whitening his braces rubber bands, and occasionally forming a glassy pain at the corner of his mouth. I would remember the way his head bobbed and imagine those two parallel rods at the back of his neck, which made a thin valley where a short tip of hair lay tapered and curled, the way he scratched his ear by wincing, raising a shoulder, and rubbing the side of his head on his jacket sleeve seam. The seam of the jacket sleeve. Cute? ? You bet he was cute. They all were. More sociological details. Dillard doing sociology here. We all wore white cotton gloves. Only with the greatest of effort could I sometimes feel, or fancy I felt, the warmth of a boy's hand, through his glove and my glove, on my right palm. My gloved left hand lay lightly, always lightly, on his jacket shoulder. His gloved right hand lay, forgotten by both of us, across the clumsy back of my dress, across its lumpy velvet bow, or its long cold zipper concealed by brocade. We were all on some list. We were to be on that list for life, it turned out, unless we left. So you're on this list, your life was pre-planned out for you, unless you left the town, right? I had no inkling of this crucial fact, although the others, I believe, did. I was mystified to see that whoever devised the list misunderstood things so. So they made the list, but they didn't get it right, I guess is what she's saying. She talks more about males here, goes further. The boys. How little I understood them. How little I even glimpsed who they were. How little any of us did, if I may extrapolate. how completely I condescended to them when we were 10, and they were in many ways my betters. Interesting, right? And when we were 15, how little I understood them still, or again. I still thought they were all alike. For all practical purposes, no longer comical beasts now, but walking gods who conferred divine power with their least glances. In fact, they were neither beasts nor gods, as I should have guessed. If they were alike, it was in this, that all along the boys had been in the process of becoming responsible members of an actual and moral world we small-minded and fast-talking girls had never heard of. They had been learning self-control. We had failed to develop any selves even worth controlling. We were enforcers of a code. That's the girl. She and her girls enforce codes. So it's interesting. She's saying, we create these codes, us girls, she's saying in the prose, that we enforce. And boys were doing this other thing. They were learning, I guess, something else, the world or whatever. We were vigilantes of the trivial. That's what she says. We girls are vigilantes of the trivial. They had been accumulating information about the world outside our private schools and clubs. We had failed to notice that there was even such a thing. The life of Pittsburgh, say, or the United States, or assorted foreign continents concerned us no more than Jupiter did or its moons. She's talking about a different era. Totally different, or maybe not, than our era. Again, she's looking back in this from this point of view. I promised comedy in books. I'm trying to find, there's a lot more on books. Comedy. Let's go here. 1 second. More Dillard. This is Dillard. This is my, well, I won't talk. I'll just read it. What does it feel like to be alive? Living, you stand under a waterfall. You leave the sleeping shore deliberately. You shed your dusty clothes, pick your barefoot way over the high, slippery rocks. Hold your breath, choose your footing, and step into the waterfall. The hard water pelts your skull, veins and bits on your shoulders and arms. The strong water dashes down beside you, and you feel it along your calves and thighs, rising roughly back up to the whirling surface, full of bubbles that slide up your skin or break on you at full speed. Can you breathe here? Here, where the force is greatest, and only the strength of your neck holds the river. Out of your face? Yes, you can breathe here. You could learn to live like this, and you can, if you concentrate, even look out at the peaceful far bank where maples grow straight and their leaves lean down. See the maples grow straight and the leaves lean down. It's this. I don't even, this is, let's see here. So now we're to the pen. It's kind of a real book-heavy passage. These are some of the books that she read, and of course, this reflects the era. This is what I have read all these books that she mentions in the following pages, but I read them as a child, in the 70s and 80s, So we read Leon Uris's popular novels Exodus, and better Milla 18 about the Warsaw Ghetto. We read John Hersey's The Wall, again, the Warsaw Ghetto. We read Time magazine and Life and Look. It was in the air that there had been these things. So she's learning about the Holocaust and learning about the Warsaw ghettos and, and all that. And the wars, right? We read above all, over and over, for we were young, AnneFrank's The Diary of a Young Girl. This is where we belonged. Here we were at home. I say we, but in fact, I did not know anyone else who read these things. What were my friends reading? We did not then talk about books. Our reading was private and constant, like the interior life itself. The theaters of war, the lands, the multiple seas, the very corridors of air, and the death camps in Europe, with their lines of starved, bald people, these combined were the settings in which our imaginations were first deeply stirred. So some books actually a couple of these I have not read. I haven't read 30 Seconds Over Tokyo and To Hell and Back. I have read The Naked and Dead by Norman Mailer, Run Silent, Run Deep. Tales of the South Pacific, about the American sailors. The Caine Mutiny. These were made into big Hollywood movies. Some Came Running, right? Was that Shirley MacLaine or I forget, but On the Beach, again, World War II. We read Hiroshima, more John Hersey. So she's reading certain kinds of books, and these books are educating her about what was going on in the world quite directly. And that's her fidelity in this book is to how things feel, how they appear, which for her is in a way what they are. You could say, well, yeah, duh, maybe, but no, because she and when she writes, there's an essay she wrote with the book The Writing Life, and her advice to writers, she recommends that you it's like staying close to the earth and the rocks and the skin. It's staying close to what is, and you don't want to get too far away from that, which for her is a kind of truth, I think, if I can put it that way. As a child, I read hoping to learn everything so I could be like my father. I hoped to combine my father's grasp of information and reasoning with my mother's will and her vitality. But the books were leaning me away. And when she says away, visiting, traveling, meaning outside of Pittsburgh. So she goes on to talk about all the different places her books. There's a lot of strange passages. Like there's a passage, I don't mean strange, and that to me they're not so familiar. I read one now. In summer, we girls commonly greet each other after a perfunctory hello by extending our forearms side by side to compare tans. We were blonde, we were tan, and our teeth were white and straightened. Our legs were brown and depilated. Our blue eyes glittered pale in our dark faces. We laughed. We shuffled the cards fast and dealt four hands. It was not for me. Not for her. I hated it so passionately. I thought my shoulders and arms, swinging at the world, would split off from my body like loose spinning blades and fly wild and slice everyone up. With all my heart, sometimes I long for the Lower East Side of Manhattan, for Brooklyn and for the Bronx. So she doesn't want to be, I said earlier she loves it. She doesn't love it. You know, she says she hates it. So she wants to be in the Bronx, and she longs in the East Village, West Village, probably Lower East Village, Lower Manhattan. She says, where the thoughtful and feeling people in books grew up on porch stoops among seamstress intellectuals. There I belonged. There is where the book people were. Recent Jewish immigrants. Everybody deep, every livelong minute. I could see them. She goes on to imagine this other world that she's not in. Child dreaming. So she leaves the church, writes that letter to her pastor. And then she ends the book. She ends the book there, as in childhood, more or less. She doesn't go into later I'm trying to find that part where her mom, I think her mom basically taught the children in her house how to tell jokes. And they say, well, this is the straight man, and they do these little long passages in the book where they talk about that. I think I've read too much. I don't know. I enjoy, when you love something, you kind of do that. You get carried away with it. I try to read it with as much clarity as I could. But she ends her book about jazz, right? She says, I held my pen on the red paper label of the modern jazz record on the turntable, played that side past midnight over and over, and let the pen draw a circle hours thick. In New Orleans, if you could get to New Orleans, would the music be loud enough? So she's thinking she wants to go to New Orleans, but she's hoping that the music will be real loud when she gets there. And that's how the book ends. That's the last sentence of the book. That's American childhood. The 50s, and comparing the tans and the learning about the world, all from the point of view of, reminding the reader that she's skin, and that there's different kinds of skin, and that when she's comparing her tans with the arms with the other kids, she's imagining that her arm is going to flail away and slice people up. But the imagery, bodily imagery, I like that she's ambivalent. That's the greatness of this book, is her love and she's reveling in those years in that era in a way that would be only possible for somebody who lived it, who had her childhood. Only someone with her childhood in that point in time could do this. But that's far from sufficient. Far. I mean, she also has to have the artistry of syntax to weave these sentences and create this book that we're talking about today. And yeah, that's an American childhood. we're going to do some episodes on local people affected by this hurricane, some quite directly. People in the River Arch District and other places. I'm going to bring them on the show, and we're going to embrace them and their stories, and we're going to talk about what's going on. But we're also going to continue to talk about aesthetics more widely, of course. We always will. And I'm sure I've forgotten many things. I have a concert on the 17th here. I'm going to stream. That's in the works. It's more kind of a little bit of a pop-up. It'll be a long time since we played with Zach and Justin, and then other things that I'm sure I've forgotten about that I'm going to do, and we'll let you know as they happen. Things in life don't always have to be, of course, they can't be perfect. They're always going to be imperfect. And even when episodes are scheduled. So this episode was a month and a half late. But I sort of feel, in a way, that the episode is maybe, if I could say, if I'm allowed to say this, is better. Perhaps because of that extra month. And maybe, I don't know. We'll never know. We can't know. We're just doing it now. And we did it then. And you saw pictures of where I live. So you have some context. And I think that's all for now. I think I'm going to say goodbye and thank everybody for coming. The Journey of an Aesthete podcast, Mitch Hampton, and I hope you have, even in times like this, even a decent weekend, maybe, or a good weekend. So thank you.